This is really a cool experience for me. Seth Godin is a best-selling author. He's a speaker. He's an entrepreneur. Probably, I think Seth's written 20 books. This is his 20th book. I think I've read all 20 of them. But probably the book that impacted my career the most was a book he wrote called Purple Cow. And if you haven't read the book Purple Cow, after you finish the practice, which as a reminder, we've sent to all of you who gave us your address. If it hasn't arrived yet, it will be there in the next day or so. But after the practice, I would recommend you read the book Purple Cow if you haven't. The concept behind Purple Cow is that businesses need to be remarkable, that ordinary businesses and ordinary careers are pretty boring, but that remarkable businesses, remarkable careers lead to extraordinary results. And the concept is, how many normal cows do you drive by and pay no attention to? But when you see a purple cow on the side of the road, you would stop and take pictures of that. And he calls it the 5th P of marketing, Purple Cow. I actually had a chance to go to Seth's loft in upstate New York with about 25 other executives and spend a day in my early 20s talking to him about Purple Cow and how to do that. And it's really been something that over the last 15 years, I've tried to incorporate into my career. And so when I saw this book, The Practice, was coming out and read a little bit of the excerpt for it, it just felt like exactly the right conversation for us to be having on the front end of this forum today. And graciously, Seth accepted and agreed to come and share a little bit of his insight with all of us. So what we're going to do is he's going to talk for about 15 minutes or so, and then we're going to have a robust Q&A. I've got some questions for him, but please use the comments in the Run the Room forum as well so I can grab your questions as well. But with that, Seth, I'll turn it over to you for just introductory remarks.
This is not going to be your typical academic rant because I have a distinct set of assertions and a point of view, and we'll see what happens. And I hope that you will ask your questions rapidly and with enthusiasm in the chat because I mostly came to talk with you. What is it in 3 words that you and your team do? And I want to argue that what you do in 3 words is ship creative work. Ship, because if it doesn't ship, it doesn't count. If you have a really cool idea, it doesn't count. If you came up with the idea for this search engine or that social network and you didn't launch it, doesn't count. Creative, because creative is human work, something that might not work, something generous, something true, something that's realer than real. And work, because you have to do it even if you don't feel like it. No one wants you to be authentic. There are no prizes for authenticity. We are looking for you to be consistent, to show up and make something happen. So when I think about the challenge that organizations, big and small, whether they're PhD students at Skibo Hall or people who work at a big company trying to make change happen, most people think the challenge is that there's not enough good ideas. They think the challenge is that if they could just get a good enough idea, that would make all the difference. And my argument is that's not your problem. Your problem is you don't have enough bad ideas and you are afraid of bad ideas. And because you are afraid of bad ideas, you go to meetings 5 times more than you should. Because you are afraid of bad ideas, you don't ship your work. Because you're afraid of bad ideas, you have invented the idea of writer's block. So I brought some writer's blocks with me. I make them on my laser glow forge. They're 1.5-inch square cubes, and there's a mantra on each side, and one of the sides says, there's no such thing as writer's block. How can that be? Because writer's block is real. Yes, it is real, and it's made up. It doesn't exist. Because writer's block is simply fear of bad writing. I was friends with Isaac Asimov. I worked with him. You can see the product I did with him right over there on my shoulder. Isaac wrote and published 400 books in his lifetime, back when it was hard to publish a book. 400 books. Isaac, how did you publish 400 books? He said, see this typewriter in the middle of my little apartment? I sit at it from 6:30 in the morning till noon, and I type. And it doesn't matter if I type something good or bad, I just type. And what his subconscious figured out is that if it's going to be sitting there typing anyway, you might as well type something better. And so we need to ship the work. And what does it mean to be creative? Because to be creative does not mean to be wholly original. Creativity rhymes with what came before. And that demands that we understand genre. Genre does not mean generic. Genre means it reminds us of what came before. That if Lou Reed had made Walk on the Wild Side 20 years earlier or 20 years later, it would have failed because it didn't fit into the box that it needed to fit in those moments. So have you done the reading? Do you understand the state of the art? And then, are you ready to make assertions? Assertions about how the world works. Assertions that if we do this, then that will happen. Because it is this act, this repetitive act, call it a practice, if you will, showing up and saying, here, I made this based on these assertions and assumptions. Where do we go next? So that's where the rant begins. But then we have to place it in the context of bureaucracy. Because a bureaucracy, as the late David Graeber wrote about, is actually a fairly good thing in that it protects us from the vicissitudes of the kleptocracy and bullies. But on the other hand, the bureaucracy doesn't want what it says it wants. It doesn't want a breakthrough idea. It's afraid of breakthroughs. It doesn't want something profitable because then it will raise the bar. What it wants is something to tell the boss. And you and I all know about all the examples of internal innovation all the way back to Xerox PARC, where somebody comes up with an idea, but then they don't ship creative work. And it's not because the star was a bad computer. It's because there was too much fear. And I was talking to my friend Lisa yesterday. Lisa was advisor to the CEO of Kodak. Kodak had all the patents on digital photography. Kodak was watching its traditional photography business go down the toilet. And Lisa's sitting in the CEO's office and she says to him, why don't you just double down on the investment in digital cameras and all the processing, photo and everything else? You can win. You can win in a week and just downscale your photography gracefully. And he calls her over to the window and he says, Lisa, how many steps do you think there are in making a roll of Kodachrome film? Lisa says, I have no idea. He says, 38. Look out this window. How many buildings do you see? 38. There were 38 buildings on the Kodak campus, one for each one of the processes. They couldn't gracefully slow down anything. Either a building was open or it wasn't. And even though CEOs should know that they should ignore sunk costs, we're humans, and humans have a lot of trouble ignoring sunk costs. And so our job as innovators is to fail more, have more bad ideas, and then create a story so that the people we are trying to sell our ideas to aren't judging the ideas based on their lame understanding of innovation. And that's what this block says. All criticism is not the same. Do not listen to their criticism of your idea. You can listen to their criticism of your story because that's what they're buying from you is a story. But we're well aware that the ideas are going to grow somewhere, and it's your job to figure out how to get them to grow where you are. So the purpose of writing a book like The Practice is that I would like to help you help your company grow. And you will help your company grow if you can start circles of support. If you can figure out how to create groups of people who will engage in the practice, who will show up on the regular, unafraid of bad ideas, because they are the fuel for all of this. And I guess the last part of my rant, and then I'll take your questions because I can see them coming in, is this. If you've ever had a brainstorming session with people who aren't professional brainstormers, you know that they don't work. You put out the M&Ms, you put out the beanbag chairs, and you say, all right, let's come up with crazy ideas. And after 2 or 3 or 4 ideas, it slows down. Is that because no one has any ideas? Unlikely. It's because when they get close to the truth and the real one, they say to themselves, whoa, 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 I better not say anything, because if I say something, I'm going to have to do it. And that same fear, Steve Pressfield's resistance, is what's going to happen when we open the floor to questions. You're going to want someone else to ask the question, because what if you look like an idiot with your question? And that's a shame, because looking like an idiot is a big part of your job. And you should let the cogs be cogs, and you should lean into the fact that if we already knew the answer, we'd do it already. And your job is to go through all the bad answers until we find the one that works. So that's my rant. Thank you for reading my book if you get a chance. And especially thank you for sharing it and making something magic happen.
All right, Seth. So first question, someone wants to know, what would you have said to the Kodak CEO when he showed you the 38 buildings if you were Lisa?
Well, I would have shown that 3-minute clip from Mad Men in which Don Draper is talking to the ad folks about the carousel film projector. And he explains that Kodak has never sold film. Kodak sells a time machine. And digital cameras don't use any film. And Kodak thought they were a chemical company, and they weren't. And ironically, that Isaac Asimov product you see up there was published by Kodak. So I worked with Kodak back in the day, and I know that they were a chemical company pretending to sell film. And what you need to figure out is, would you rather go down slowly and painfully, or would you rather take a deep breath and figure out what you really stand for? What change are you seeking to make? Because if you're not making change, then why are you here?
Awesome. So Meg wants to know, what do you think is the fastest way to determine if something is a bad idea?
Okay, so people with domain knowledge can safely eliminate 80% of ideas simply because they're not idiots. So a turkey flavored creamsicle is not a good idea. You don't have to actually make turkey flavored creamsicles and test them in the dessert aisle to know, based on your experience, that turkey does not belong in a popsicle. But that still leaves the 20%. And it's the 20% that I'm challenging you to dance with. So back when I invented email marketing, we were sending emails to more people every day than any legal non-spam entity in the world. And one day, someone comes to me and says, I have an idea for a subject line for an email, because in those days, the subject line was everything. And the subject line was, how many Microsoft engineers does it take to screw in a light bulb? And I said, that's the stupidest idea I ever heard. That's not going to work. But then I did it. And I did it because I knew that 23 years later, I would be at this esteemed institution telling this story, and I wanted an example. And I'm here to tell you that that subject line doubled the open rate of the emails in that campaign, because nobody knows anything. And unlike turkey popsicles, I wasn't going to make anybody sick. The cost of sharing that idea with 5% of the list was tiny, and I learned a lot. And I think that combination is really important. Are you going to learn anything by testing this idea? And is the act of testing it going to wreck it? Or can you do it full out without compromising it? Because most big institutions, when it's time to launch something, first they dumb it down, they sand off the edges, and they make it suck. And that's why it fails.
Excellent. So Dan wants to know, how do you apply this in a large company where the culture is not yet receptive to, quote, bad ideas?
The culture is never going to be receptive to bad ideas. That's why you get a good job with snacks. That's why your job even exists. No, they're never going to say, that's a bad idea, let's try it, ever. So your job is that you are human cannon fodder. You're just showing up, running interference, doing things with the pirate flag hanging over your office in the back room. And it's not just old companies. So when I was at Yahoo, there were only 5 vice presidents. And I was talking to Jerry Yang one day. He sent me home for wearing a tie once. I was talking to Jerry Yang one day, and I said, Jerry, here's what I'd like to do. I would like you to cut my salary by 90%. I just want the stock option. I'm going to take 2 people and I'm going to go across the street to a cheap office, and we're going to build the businesses that you guys are busy buying for $1 billion each. And that way you'll just get the plan ready to go, as opposed to, and he turned to me and he said, you know what, Seth? We can't do that. Because if we did that, everyone else would want that job. I was like, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard anybody say in your role. You're running the internet and you don't want to innovate because you're afraid of hurting feelings of other people who want to innovate. What happened at Yahoo, which was only 7 years old when I was there, was everyone was afraid. The stock price was going up $2 or $3 a day, and no one wanted to be the person who did something stupid. And because they never did anything stupid, Yahoo's gone. It's that simple. They just did not want to do stupid things.
What's interesting about that is, right, like years later, Yahoo Brickhouse was basically what you were pitching, ironically, what Salim built. But it's probably easier to do it at that point in Yahoo's trajectory
Right.
than when you were pitching it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a question, which is how do you unpack the good and bad ideas without access to the traditional resources used to execute them?
Right. So I write a blog post every day. How much does that cost? Making a book costs a lot. If I get a book wrong, I'm 20 for 20 bestsellers in a row. If I get one wrong, I don't get too many more chances, right? If I get a blog post wrong, tomorrow will be here really soon. So you need to build the equivalent of blog posts. How do you make it so there's pressure on your team to come up with a new bad idea every single day to be put somewhere in the world? Because if that is happening on the regular, you're not going to publish an idea because it's perfect. You're going to publish an idea because it's tomorrow.
So I think that's exactly right. So we have what feels like a high class problem, but I think it's an interesting kind of corporate perspective on this, which is, what if you enlist a team into an idea, and after exploring it for a few months, it goes viral and starts to feel unsustainable? She says she feels the need to focus on filling gaps to refine those experiences and gets caught up in operations.
I'm hearing a few different questions there. The first one is, what if we have an idea, it's bad, but it starts to work?
Yep.
Well, then it worked.
Then it's your light bulb idea? Is that the point?
Well, I mean, what was the problem with an idea that works? I missed that part. But yes, getting stuck in operations is a real thing. I just turned Akimbo, the workshop company I started, into a B Corp. It's independently owned by people who are not me. I am no longer part of it because I wanted it to become an institution. And so you've got to say when your businesses are working and when they're not working, be gone, go grow. Because I do this other thing that most people don't know how to do, which is, here's a clean sheet of paper. And it is inevitable that as you gain traction where you work, you're going to spend more and more time in operations. And it's ironic because they hired you precisely because they're spending so much time in operations. So get rid of it. Just swipe it off your plate and get back to what you were supposed to do.
So I think this is being asked because people think of you not only as an idea guy, but also a marketing expert. And so, like, people want to know what's your advice for getting people to buy into your ideas? Or there's another person who want to know, how do you sell these ideas? And I think this comes back to kind of this intersection of creativity and marketing.
Yeah. So part of the problem with hanging out with groups like this is that you come to believe that people care about your ideas, and they don't. The vast majority of people have no interest or patience in your ideas whatsoever. No one wants personalized marketing. They want personal marketing. No one wants email. They want me-mail. You have to say, marketing is here to solve your problems. You're not here to solve marketing's problems. And if you can come to somebody who isn't looking for a new idea but has a problem and say, I have a thing that might solve your problem, they will be all ears because it's about them and their problem, not you and your need to make your idea work.
Good. So a couple other questions sort of with Seth, the father of modern marketing, as opposed to the idea guy. So a couple people asked it in different ways, but Matt says, how do you think marketing is changing, if at all, in this pandemic?
Well, I think that people are waking up to the fact that marketing and advertising are not the same thing, and that hype and one more way to spend your money and one more bunch of junk to put in storage isn't nearly as important as things that give you meaning. And so all those things are good things. Marketing is what you make and how you make it and who you hire and what your side effects are and the way you talk about it. Everyone in the company works in the marketing department. And we are seeing that companies with resilience are the ones that are going back to first principles and saying, who are we seeking to serve? What's the smallest viable audience? And then how do we delight them so much that they tell other people?
Awesome. So career advice from Daniel Wan. So when you're stuck in a culture that shuns ideas, good or bad, what are some signs that you should drive change or move on to a better environment?
Well, first I'll say you only get 2021 once, and it's going to be a much better year than 2020. I can say that without fear of error. So don't waste it. And if you are truly stuck, you should leave. Most people I talk to, when I call their bluff that way, say, nah, I think I'll just stay. So I would, make a list. What are the things that have to change around here for you to stay? And then go change those things. What's the worst that'll happen? They'll fire you, but they probably won't. Most of the time, we are stuck because we don't want to be on the hook. And I think being on the hook is the best place to be. Who can you make promises to, and how can you keep them?
Awesome. So similar to your Kodak example, this is from Eric. What's your favorite example of a success story where a large company disrupted its core business to taste something new and unproven?
Netflix, easy. 3 times we did it, right? And you used to be able to rent every DVD ever made by mail from Netflix. Now you watch shows that Netflix made on their own. That was a bet everything situation. Compare that to Blockbuster. Do you know that Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix for a few $1 million and did not? And do you know why? Because at the board meeting, some yutz raises their hand and say, but we make so much money from late fees that if we serve our customers better the way Netflix does, we'll regret it.
Good. Okay, so another question. This is from, let's see. This is from Zine. How do you pick an idea out of a group of people with unique ideas?
So let's integrate that with John's question.
Great.
Can you be too narrow in defining your initial target customer?
Yep.
The Zen. That's a good pun. The Zen diagram. The Zen diagram overlapping the two of them is the answer. Pick the smallest viable audience. No, you cannot be too narrow. The very smallest possible audience. Is this idea going to overwhelm them with delight? Or are you just looking for something to do? Because if you can figure out how to nail that thing, right, then you have a good idea.
Awesome. And Zine says brilliant. So positive feedback there, Seth. Okay, so what I can't figure out this. I think this is a username that's not actually their name. But what do you think about the EV industry? Do you think CEOs of traditional gas vehicles should be worried about the emergence of this industry?
ED like erectile dysfunction?
EV, no, EV like electric vehicle.
Electric vehicles, okay.
And then gas-powered automobiles. So should the gas automobile industry be worried about the electric vehicle industry?
It's really clear that discussion's already over. And I'm surprised, it's really fascinating to watch Ford and Cadillac play around the edges of this. But I think that they are both, if they're not careful, headed for a Kodak moment, because the people who work at car companies like a certain kind of car. You just read interviews with them, you look at the heritage, there's a thing they like. But the customer that's buying new cars doesn't really like that. And so there's a significant disconnect. And they've been handed on a silver platter this opportunity because the guy who runs their biggest competitor is a little bit of a nut and he's not disciplined. And they have wasted at least 3 years when their discipline and dealer network and scale could have completely changed the game for them. And once there's a technology gap that's so obvious that it's going to be hard to overcome, their dealer network's not going to be worth very much. So they better hurry. The simple question is, it's 2030. What percentage of our business is going to be from cars that run gasoline? I don't know how you look me in the eye and say 80%. I just don't see how that's possible.
Awesome. So the questions keep coming in, which is awesome. Keep them coming. But Christine Carrillo wants to know, what do you see as the best skills that entrepreneurs should cultivate or develop?
Most entrepreneurs are actually freelancers, and they should be very clear about the difference between the two. So in this group, I think we're talking about real entrepreneurs, but freelancers, I'm a freelancer, proud of it. No employees. You work with your own 2 fingers. You get paid when you work. Entrepreneurs build something bigger than themselves, and they make money when they sleep. And their job is to use other people's money to make something that works and then sell it. And so the first thing entrepreneurs have to get good at that I was bad at is every time there's a job you can hire someone to do, you should hire someone to do it. That should be your only job, is to figure out who's going to do the next job you're going to hire someone to do. Because anytime you're doing the work, you are causing your organization to suffer. And then the second thing is, I think entrepreneurs who succeed tend to be the ones who are good at telling a story. It doesn't mean they're charismatic or glib, but it means they understand who needs to hear the story and what the story is. So, no one ever accused Mark Zuckerberg of being charismatic or glib, but the story at the beginning of Facebook was, hey, are you a lonely Harvard student? This will get you a date on Saturday. And then the story became, people are talking about you behind your back. Do you want to see what they're saying? Those are two brilliant stories, one after the other. And Facebook's still sticking with the second one.
Awesome. So Clark wants to know, if the company I work for doesn't want to innovate, is there a risk with developing a solution on your own while still employed and selling to them? Any ideas of how to manage that risk?
Well, Clark, you're totally outed now because everyone on this thing, unless you're using an assumed name, knows what you're up to. I would call an IP lawyer and not ask someone who's a marketer who pretends he knows what he's talking
about. Nick wants to know, how do you balance the practical need for resources, paychecks, stability with the importance of being entrepreneurial and shipping creative work?
Shipping creative work has nothing to do with being entrepreneurial. They're totally separate things, right? Like the cover of this book, people look at it and they go, "What? That's a great cover." Anyone could have made this cover in Illustrator. That's creative work. The person who made it didn't have to quit their job. The person who made it didn't need a lot of resources. They needed the power to tell a story to someone who would say yes. They needed authority and leverage and insight. That's creative work. If you want to be an entrepreneur, my experience, having started many, many things, is pick ideas that match your resources. So my first 5 years, I had zero resources. I didn't even have a laser printer. I paid $1 a page to print things out. And I entered the book business where you can sell a book for $1 million by printing 10 pages with a laser printer. The leverage is significant. You can't sell anything for $100 million, but you don't need a factory, right? So lots of entrepreneurs who are stuck because they think that they're going to come up with the next electric vehicle, but they only have $500,000.
Awesome. We'll come back to a couple of these, but I want to jump to Meg so that it ties in nicely here. So what's your most recent revelation about the way you work?
About the way I work?
Yeah.
I need to feel like the ground under me isn't too shaky and that the road in front of me is pretty open.
Interesting.
And that doesn't mean I want an expectation from the outside world that I'm going to do something, nor does it mean I want a guarantee. It just means that in 2020, watching how much trauma there was in the world, coming face to face with the previously ignored racial injustice, with looking at illness and experiencing it in people I care about, it was harder for me to find my footing. And that's true for a lot of other people. And setting up my workspace so that there is a blank hole I have to fill up and a blog that I have to write tomorrow, those two things help me do better work.
That's great. Speaking of 2020, do you have any tips for team brainstorming sessions that are taking place online versus in person?
Oh, yeah. First of all, don't use Zoom calls as a way to take attendance, as a way to show your power to make sure that people are at work. And if you really want to run a brainstorming session in Zoom, here's how it works. You have a shared Google Doc. Everyone's in the Google Doc. Everyone's in the Zoom call. You don't have to come to the Zoom call. But if you come to the Zoom call and you don't add ideas to the Google Doc, you're fired. That's it. Let's go. How many bad ideas can we type into this Google Doc in 30 minutes? Go. That's it. And if you don't type anything, you're bad at brainstorming, which means you're bad at your job, which means you wasted my time. You're fired. It's that simple. You don't have to come. But if you're going to come, type a lot of crap in the Google Doc. We'll sort it out later.
That's
You can
great.
laugh, but I do this in the Alt MBA. I'm not in it, but in the Alt MBA I built, 5,000 people have been through it, and every single one of them figures it out. It's not that hard.
No, I just think I'm just picturing the email from the CEO. Come to this brainstorming meeting if you want, but but if you come, you got to type a lot of crap in the Google Doc. And it seems from the multiple love that's that was good. So, all right. So Eric wants to know, how much inspiration do you get from other people versus personal reflection?
I get almost all my motivation from other people, from my readers, from watching what they build, from watching what they do. The reason I was eager to come here today is because I had met you years ago and look what you've built. I was like, that's inspiring to me. I'll get something out of this because you are building something. I don't, I've had 10 ideas that are Wikipedia friendly, worthy, whatever, but I've had 10,000 that aren't. So I just talk about the 10 more.
Yeah. I mean, they're pretty asymmetric though, right? And in terms of like the impact of those versus the ones that didn't
because
work
as
there.
soon as I figure out that I had a lousy one, like one of my first ones was a book called How to Hypnotize Your Friends and Make Them Act Like Chickens, which was stage hypnotism for people at home. I still think it's a great idea for a book, but you don't hear me pitching that one.
Yeah, maybe I haven't read all your books. So what do you see as the biggest differences between innovating with big companies compared to innovating as an entrepreneur? And I assume she means kind of small companies besides for resources.
I think it's enrollment. I think I've seen people who had enrollment from their bosses who said, 2 years from now, we're not going to do what we do now. We're going to do something you invent. Please go. If you can get enrollment before the idea is exposed, you can innovate as much as anybody else, right? On the other hand, if they're saying, show me it and then I'll decide, it's not going to work. So just an aside as we start to wrap this up, you may have noticed that I'm wearing a uniform. I'll show you the back here.
Okay.
This is a chef's jacket. They're embroidered. They're not very expensive. I'm a big fan of wearing a uniform for brainstorming sessions and things like that. And I think for you to be able to say to the 3 people on your team, the 4 people on your team, put on the smock because we're going to do our work now. It's a trigger. It changes people. It's a point of view. Now that not everyone's showing up in a suit and a tie and a skirt and a bow and the whole thing, we need triggers. And maybe it could just be a silly hat for everybody. But having a way to say, we're here to do our work now, like magicians do it. They show up and say, I'm going to do a trick. That's what the cards mean. So you need a way to say, we got the cards. Here we go.
Yeah, I love that. One other question from Christine Carrillo that I'd skipped over earlier was, if you could only read one chapter in your book, what chapter would that be?
It's just like a plot to ruin my day. First a Google question and then I know you spent 4 years of your life writing this book, but I only have enough time to read 10 pages. The book has 200 chapters in it. Each chapter, there are no big words, right? Read the whole thing.
I will say it's on Audible as well if you want to listen, and Seth reads it, and so that's another way to consume it.
It's basically a rant that lasts 5 hours and 15 minutes. You can listen at double speed, get it over within 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Oh, Quarantin has the same question. He wants to know how to be better at storytelling. And maybe we've got time for like one more after this, guys, just in the interest of being
So my dear friend Bernadette Jiwa has written 6 bestsellers about telling stories. So if you're analytic, read her 90-page books on the technology of storytelling. If you're intuitive like me, the best way by far is to tell stories. Tell stories to 3-year-olds, help run a summer camp, tell stories on the phone, tell stories in meetings. Stories don't start with once upon a time. Stories aren't anecdotes. Stories are the original human technology, the way our brain hooks into something. A Harley Davidson motorcycle is a story in 2 words and 1 sound. It's a story. The smell of walking into a Panera Bread on purpose, that's part of their story. And You get better at stories simply by telling them more often and watching what happens.
All right. And then I think this is a great one to end on. Andy wants to know, what's the best piece of advice Seth wants us to take away from today?
But I want to answer this question.
Okay.
Don't take advice. That's my answer. Don't take advice other than do the work. Show up and do the work and fail more than anybody else. You have enormous leverage. You have the luxury of not needing to worry about paying the rent. You have people around you who trust you and believe you. You will succeed if you take advantage of that by failing more than anybody else, because the person who fails the most wins.
Awesome. Seth, thank you for doing this. I really can't thank you enough, man, and congrats on the success of book number 20. For the participants in the forum, we're going to come back after this. We've got Rebecca Nugent, who's my colleague and runs the data science program at Carnegie Mellon. She's going to talk with myself and then 3 folks from industry about taking the data that's trapped inside your organizations and turning those into innovative new products and services. Something that we're hearing more and more of you want to figure out these days. So we're going to go from a very kind of hopefully motivational ship, do interesting things, talk to a very pragmatic, what can you do tomorrow to monetize and create new value with the data in your organization. Seth, thanks one more time. I really appreciate this, man.
My pleasure. Go make a ruckus, everybody. Be well.